Welcome back to Millennial Z and Boomer X. I am Boomer X,
And I am Millennial Z.
and thank you for listening to our podcast or watching on YouTube. And please subscribe so we can bring you more episodes and spread far and wide. Today, we are talking about conspiracy theories and which ones actually became true. Uh, Conspiracy theories always has the taint that you're kind of crazy and a little bit foolish and
Hmm.
probably even a little bit dumb if you buy into conspiracy theories.
Some
And
of them.
that, yeah, yeah, and like, oh, you're kind of simple-minded, huh? You think everybody's out to get you, or you're paranoid, or. But
Yeah.
honestly, the reason why I believe they've caught everybody's attention is because more often than people want to admit, they are true.
Hmm.
And that ought to freak people out. In fact, I think it's become true so often in the public's knowledge and awareness that they're kind of jaded and they don't even, they're just kind of, well, figures. And they just move on. They don't even
Right.
think it's a big deal anymore. Because everybody at some subconscious level knows there's stuff going on beyond their awareness that shouldn't be going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting take. I think some people are definitely jaded, but I do think also a lot of journalists take active lengths to try to suppress any type of thoughts on certain agendas or narratives that conspiracy theories that try to get out of hand. They immediately start making articles. And I know it's like the opposition to quell the storm, and other people want to feel safe, so they get that type of audience. So they know that they're placating to some type of audience that doesn't want to hear those terrible things.
Right, right. You want to make people feel better. That's your whole thing. You don't want to
Hmm.
cause a panic or fright or tell people things that aren't true and scare them for no reason at
Right.
all, or make people think even wilder things just because this one little bad thing may be true. And
Hmm.
I get that, but the reason why people listen to the media is for entertainment, to learn something, or to be aware of something that they need to be. And sometimes you're just going to make them nervous or even frightened if you give that information. But it's far better you do that than them know nothing and can't take precaution, in my estimation, anyway.
Right.
So
Yeah. But definitely
it's
better to just give out facts instead of trying to
right.
suppress any type of information going
I
on.
think so. Yeah.
Hmm.
One of the things that, and this is recent, and everybody is aware of this who's probably listening to this. About 10 to 13 years ago, there was a rumor going around that your phone and your television was listening to you on
Yeah.
through the microphone, and everybody blew it off as conspiracy theory, and it turned out to be 100% true. And now it's so common that people don't even think about it when you
Oh yeah.
talk about a subject, and the next thing you know, you pick up your phone and there's the advertising you were
Yeah.
just speaking about.
Yeah. People just joke about it now when it terrified people, in the 70s alone, let alone 50s or so. They would literally freak out
Right.
for that to
And
happen.
and like, oh, that's impossible. They wouldn't do that. No, they do it, and it's so common and it's so well known now that people just kind of shrug or like laugh about it, that like you mentioned. But that should really make you go, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
if,
It's
if you
really
think about
crazy.
the implications of it, it really is. And that's a really good indicator how jaded people have become about a complete lack of privacy almost, unless you
I'm sure
take
there's
extreme measures.
petabytes of information stored of the
Uh,
most benign
well,
conversations.
that's one of the things, one of the another of the conspiracy theories I was going to talk about is Snowden. He came out and said the NSA is recording every bit of information available, electronically obtained and stored that can possibly be done on everybody, and it's stored. And they said one, he's crazy, and the other, he's a traitor. Then they started chasing him down. So
Right.
which
Which one
is it?
is it? If is it
Yeah,
crazy,
yeah.
why are you
He's
saying he's
releasing
treasonous?
right. He's treasonous. He's releasing top secret information from the highest level of intelligence. He was just a tech guy. He was a smart tech guy, and he was experienced and knowledgeable and skilled. But you can't have it both ways. So that should have made people pause right there. It's like, okay, they just made a paradoxical statement about somebody they
Hmm.
clearly don't like. So
Well,
I'm
made
being
that one
lied
blow
to.
up so much was I remember reading they just had a court statement about the NSA saying that they aren't surveilling people.
That's
And
right. And that's why he
and then
came out, because he said
mhm,
this is just a blatant lie, and the
right.
American people need to know that that's a blatant lie, and that's why he came out. I saw an interview on him on YouTube,
Hmm.
of course, while he was in another country because he can't come back here,
Right.
and and he just laid it all out there, and it turned out to be, and he's right, all information on the internet is somewhere held by the NSA. And the funny
Hello,
thing
NSA
is,
Federation.
oh yeah, I was laughing about it. I told you when we started this podcast not long ago, just 3 weeks, they're our second largest downloader. Because I know where it is, and it shows up on a graphical representation, the mainframe. They're our second largest downloader because we have a small audience, and
Hmm.
but they're there and they're downloading every episode, and some AI is going over everything we say, and you have to accept it. You can't change it, and
Right.
it is what it is, as they say, and it's going to
Mhm.
continue. And honestly, I'm okay with it. I'm who I am. We say what we say. There is still the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights, although they can toss that out of the window, apparently, depending on who you are, what you say, and where you are when you say it, and who hears it. But
Mhm.
as an adult, you're just going to live with the consequences, and you do what you think you need to do.
Well, the problem is if there is starting to become a tyrannical force, any type of efforts of conspiring against it is going to be a lot harder.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like I said, privacy is virtually non-existent now,
Hmm.
unless you take extreme measures to obtain it, and even then, it's a maybe.
Hmm.
So, and that sort of spawns conspiracy theories as well.
Yeah.
That sort of thing, knowing that information. So I find that pretty interesting. And one of the big ones in this one kicks off all sorts of bells for people. The old MK Ultra, you've heard of that one. Conspiracy theorists make that loud, and people blew them off as being crazy and all that. As soon as they mention MK Ultra,
Is that the
uh,
LSD one?
yeah, the government was running massive mind control experiments through
Hmm.
American universities, using them as a cover and a means to dump LSD in people's drinks, and then they would kidnap them and study them, and then interrogate and interview them, debrief them, make threats to them, and turn them loose. And the funny thing was, they did this even in illegal brothels all over the country because they knew they had leverage over these people, because they didn't want to be outed. Now this was in the 60s, so
Right.
people who were running around on their spouse, so they face severe repercussions back then.
Right.
They do now, but not like back then. You were
Hmm.
ostracized, and you were broke, and you were lost your job probably,
Right.
and nobody and everybody thought, well, that's good for you. The entire society supported that kind of thing. Now personal lives are more personal lives than back then, depending on who you are and what you're doing.
Hmm.
But the thing is, the only reason we know about it now is because the Freedom of Information Act that somebody used to obtain that documentation and put it out there on the internet and published it and said, look, it's true. This did happen to American citizens. They weren't supposed to be doing any operations. And not only that, not only was it illegal, they hurt these people and potentially ruined these people. And there's no telling what happened to these people. And it's all out there for you to read. It's not being naturally, it's old. It's
Hmm.
60, 50, 60 years old, but it still happened. I mean, it definitely went on. And the other conspiracy theory that was true was COINTELPRO, that most people are aware of. And it, again, 60s. Apparently, the U.S. government was running crazy in the 60s.
It's been
And the
ever since.
FBI,
That's just
yeah,
the latest information coming out.
tracking Martin Luther King Jr., Marilyn Monroe, all this. And
Oh yeah.
they weren't suspected of breaking any laws, suppressing Black Panthers, causing dissension. And that wasn't the CIA who were worried about national security. That was the FBI for political reasons. They
Yep.
should have never been around. There were no crimes suspected of these people.
Well, they were a little bit more they were a little bit more in depth than that. I know the FBI. I remember reading
A lot more
FBI.
in depth. When J.
Yeah.
Edgar Hoover ran it, he ran into his own kingdom, and they
Yeah.
had fat dossiers on people. Reason he stayed there forever through every president was because he had dossiers on them too, and would expose them, and they were deathly afraid. They left him alone. and
Yeah.
everybody knew that. And that's another conspiracy theory that turned out to be true.
Yeah, but I remember reading the FBI was trying to convince Martin Luther King Jr. to kill himself during his protest tours and everything,
Oh yeah, they were
and
constantly messing
it's
with him.
heavily implied that they were affiliated with his eventual demise.
Right, right. I mean, they have the guy who shot him, but again, that was the idea. Was the FBI behind it? Was there some
Hmm.
brain control going on or mind control going on, and all sorts of speculation there.
Hmm.
But the thing is, the fact that he was being surveilled, investigated, constantly checked on was absolutely true. And these other people, like I said, who had done not, Ernest Hemingway, for example, he
Right.
committed suicide, and him being followed by the FBI was known to be a contributor of that. Now, he may have had good reason because he turned out to be an amateur CIA spy in Cuba for the United States, but he was for the United States, even though he opened his mouth against them now and again. But he had that was part of his First Amendment rights as a U.S. citizen, and he did work for the country. So why would you want to harass the guy? And
Right.
it was known, but they thought everybody called him crazy at the time, and he was deluded and an alcoholic and all this. Turned out to be true though. And all this stuff, I want to say people can Google and find out for themselves. We're not going to give you direct websites to
Right.
promote for you, but you can certainly Google in the subject matter, what happened, and it will come up very, very easily. Like if you
Yeah, luckily there's still enough sources because sometimes some of those thread sources I see that they say they show source cited, those are just mysteriously gone. Now, whether or not they're gone because they're not, dedicated
right,
anymore, nobody's paying them anymore, or they're
right,
trying to
yeah,
scrub
people
the
don't.
internet, I'm not sure.
I'm
But
sure it's because people just didn't want to pay anymore to keep it up, and it's
hmm
become common knowledge.
most
So why
likely.
why put it up most of the
Hmm.
time? If somebody's
I
not
just
paying
found
the
it
light bill,
interesting. Most often, I'm trying to find these source cited of them showing this documentation to prove it,
right?
and weirdly enough, it's gone.
Hum.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about conspiracy theory.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty. I think it's pretty crazy how people just take it in stride and at the same time deride it as, oh, it doesn't happen. It does.
Well,
It
what's crazy
happens
to me
so
is that they
often.
act like the government's so sanctioned and they don't have any ill intention on their citizens when this has been happening forever since the prohibition. We've known that they mass poisoned the alcohol trying to get
Right,
people to stop doing it.
right. That's another one. They
Hmm.
deliberately poisoned alcohol made in stills to get
Hmm.
people to stop drinking
Yeah, they didn't
stilled
take them
alcohol.
down. They didn't
No,
destroy the
they
stills. They
killed
poisoned
people.
them. Yeah.
Yes, in the 30s, they sure did. They
Hmm.
killed them, and knowing it was going to kill them. This wasn't an
Hmm.
accident. This was
Yeah.
intentional
Well,
to
at
keep
first they
other
did a
people.
little bit to discourage them, and then they're like, "Well, this isn't working. Let's start killing them."
Right,
That's the crazy part.
right. Yeah, that is nuts. Now, sure, that was almost 100 years ago, but the people in positions of authority are the same people who want to be in positions of authority. They
Right.
think the same way. They're not the
Hmm.
same people, of course, again, 100 years ago almost, but they think similarly, or they wouldn't want to be in a position of power and tell people what to do. It takes a certain kind of mind to want to do that and go, yeah, I can do that. I want to do that. That would be cool. So so somebody wants that. That's
I'm sure
just
it wasn't that thought process. I'm sure it's
no.
always the best
Oh,
intention,
sure. It's
you
a
know.
very sophisticated and
Hmm.
complex rationale behind that. But
Hmm.
those are the emotions that I
These people don't
express.
know what they're doing to
No, they
themselves.
just need some guidance and leadership.
So I'll kill them.
And I can do it. And if they
Yeah.
don't listen, I'll just make sure that they don't
Yeah.
listen to anything
The
anymore.
true form of
They can't be
egomaniac.
trusted. Yeah, yeah. Ultimate narcissist, psychopath, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's funny. And the last one I wanted to mention from the '60s, of course, Gulf of Tonkin, which precipitated the Vietnam War. They, being the United States government, flat out lied,
Right.
made misrepresentations about what happened. There was one incident, but they made up a completely other incident to drive the Vietnam War and build up troops and
Well,
made the
not
U.S.
even
go
more.
in.
The incident I'm thinking you're probably referencing, we antagonized them on purpose
Oh
to
yeah,
get them to
yeah,
retaliate.
yeah, yeah. That's what I mean, and lied about the whole thing.
Hmm.
We just lied about the whole. It was completely fabricated. to get us into a war. It's so common now, it's considered as part of a thing that all countries do to get their country in the war. They make this giant disinformation propaganda campaign and lie to their citizenry to get them all fired up to get them to
Sounds
go
so
kill people.
familiar.
Yeah, I'm glad we don't do that anymore.
Yeah. Such yeah. One to put onto that was that led to the false flag operation in the early 1960s. America's top military leaders reportedly drafted plans to kill innocent people and commit acts of terrorism in U.S. to create public support for a war against Cuba.
Yes,
And that
and
was turned down by Kennedy, and they still
yeah,
put
he
it.
he said no, but then he went ahead and launched the Bay of Pigs, a covert operation they kept under wraps and was an absolute failure because it was poorly planned and had
Yeah.
bad logistics and they had the wrong people. So yes, but you're right. They had military officials, people who were legitimate, created a plan to actually kill American citizens to foment that craziness we spoke about before in order to
Hmm.
get a war in Cuba, so to make sure that the communists wouldn't take over.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. It's
that
the
was a
good old.
true thing, and everybody goes, "That's crazy. They wouldn't do that."
It's the good old never
Again,
tried
it
and
was the
true method
'60s,
of the
early
crusade,
'60s,
where
right?
you
It
justify your
was
enemy
right.
is the true enemy, and they do anything to kill you. So we
Yeah,
must do anything to do to
right.
them as
Yeah,
well.
and that was 60 years ago, But I'm sure some of those people are still alive, so that mode of thinking is not gone.
Hmm.
Again, people who want to be in high levels of authority are generally similar minded, I've found. Not all of them. I mean, you have your exceptions, and they become beloved leaders and people, but in general, they're pretty much similar mindsets that I've noticed.
So how do you want to do this chronologically? Because I can keep going on the 60s and 50s for
No,
a
no,
while.
you just
Those are my
mentioned the ones that, yeah, I think we're kind of done with the '60s because that was the decade of craziness. They killed. Well, we'll mention, except we got to mention JFK. We have no proof, but that's because all the proof was destroyed except for the Warren Commission, which they will not allow anybody to see the evidence thereof. You can read the reports in it, but everybody knows that that was almost blatantly misrepresentative
hmm
and everything dug up about it. If I'll just say this, if you believe there was a lone gunman that assassinated JFK, something's wrong with you. That's all I'm going to say. There's there is such a mountain of evidence to show otherwise. Not to mention, it has just come out, and you can find this on YouTube. In fact, that Lee Harvey Oswald was an active CIA operative that went to Russia on purpose. Before it was speculated he was a defector. Well, that was his cover, and also working with Cuba because Cuba was a big hot item at that time. He was working as a Marine, former Marine, for the CIA,
hmm
so it just came out, and there's all sorts of documents and things that show everybody knew what he was doing, and his mentioning that I was a patsy and then being shot by John Ruby, he was letting people know, hey, this wasn't just me involved in this whole thing.
Right.
And I was probably a very small part. Certainly, we couldn't have him talking. Like I said, it's just an overwhelming mountain of evidence. And if they say, well, that's not true, they proved that wrong. Well, why don't they just let the evidence out into the public? They've resealed it, I believe, twice since they acquired it, and it was supposed to be released in the year 2000 initially, and they just, nah, that's not happening. And then they were supposed to do it again, I think 10 or 15 years later. Like, nah, nah. And I'm going to tell you, as long as anybody's alive who knows anything about it, it won't be released. There'll be a phone call or email or something will be made and go, not yet, not yet. People are still a little raw about it. We
hmm
can't undermine the faith in the country at the time. Um, of course, I'm just speculating as to what their thoughts would be, but and again, I have no idea what spawned his assassination or why or who was involved or anything like that. There's so many bits of
There's
disinformation, misinformation,
there's plenty of
evidence that's
theories on
real or
it.
not. Right. Yeah. And other, yeah, I mean, conspiracy theorists love that one, but there's so much that is fact that points to more than one person that if you do believe that it was a single person, and one bullet that went through all those things.
Right, in different
That
angles. That
yeah,
that
that
couldn't person
something
couldn't do it in that perspective or that angle point.
that
Couldn't have done it.
speed in that time period with that weapon and no optics and a traveling thing, that all that. If you know anything about shooting,
He's a hell of a shot.
that is a minor statement there. So yeah. I'm just gonna say, and we can say we're done with the '60s, but that
Hmm.
was a decade of craziness for a lot of reasons. It spawned a lot of legends. I'll say that. That
Well,
was the
just to hit the
the
topic
golden
of
age.
viruses, since those are seeming to become a thing again, is San Francisco in the 50s. Apparently, they did a simulated warfare attack, and they spread fog in San Francisco that affected 800,000 people.
What
And
sort of fog? I never heard of that.
yep, 1950s.
And who did that? Who's they?
Us, the government.
Yeah, I say,
Eh,
yeah, because we're
Yeah,
the people are
U.S.
supposed to be
military
the government.
conducted a test to see whether it could be used to help spread a biological weapon using fog, and they sprayed a hose and they used a bacteria. Now, the bacteria wasn't supposed to be harmful, to be fair, but it didn't. They did have a direct correlation to 10 known people going to the hospital because of it and at least one death. So I'm sure there was a lot more involved, and they just don't have a direct correlation
Right.
because
They
it affected 800,000 people in just one night. It quickly spread. The fog was very effective at
so
spreading the
they just
bacteria.
used the citizenry of a major metropolitan area as guinea pigs
Yep. It was
and
one of the
said,
largest offenses
"Well,
of the
let's see."
Nuremberg Code since its inception.
Right.
Because you have to be voluntary and
Right.
informed consent. And over the
Almost.
next 20 years, the military conducted another 239 tests over populated areas.
And there were all sorts of rumors about who did it and where it started and what it was about, and flatly denied. They're like, "Oh, you're crazy. They wouldn't do that. That's just
Yeah.
so irresponsible. They wouldn't harm. They're here to defend us, not do this." And
Hmm.
turned out, nope, they did it. They not only did they do it, they did it some more. If you're
Yeah.
selling,
240 times total.
and when
200
was and when was
documented.
that initially done?
And 1950. In 1950.
1950. Yeah, that's another decade. That was after World War II, and people were just hardcore. They were
Hmm.
used to that militaristic,
Well,
top-down,
over the
tyrannical
next
type
20
of
years,
activity
so it
till the
so
70s, right?
far to the till the 70s, quote unquote. We'll see if more
Right.
documentation starts coming out later
Right,
on.
right. That we know of. Yeah,
Right.
it starts to dry up when you get into the 80s about
Weird how
what the
that works.
government
We
was
all just
doing.
stopped doing things.
Yeah, we don't do that anymore. No, we realized that was wrong. Yeah, you didn't
We
realize it
learned our
was wrong at
lesson.
the time for 30 years. All of a sudden, yeah,
Right.
the halo got polished up. Yeah,
Hmm.
it's quite interesting, I think too. Um, yeah, that's just nuts. Um, One other thing that happened in the 80s, and like I said, it's difficult to find past that because I think it gets too close to home, and the people responsible or are still in office, to be honest with you. They're
Oh
still
yeah.
here doing things. That's another reason why it's not going to be available at all.
Right.
Is that, and we mentioned about it, we mentioned it once before on another podcast, that the CIA kickstarted the crack epidemic that devastated
Hmm.
US black urban areas in the 80s. And they
Hmm.
did it to fund death squads in Central America to
Yep.
overthrow communist takeovers in Nicaragua, Colombia, places like that, Chile, and other places, that were they were trying
Billions
to
of
infiltrate and
dollars.
take over. Yes, and they used them, and there was an investigative series in the mid '90s written by journalist Gary Webb in the San Jose Mercury News. I'll mention them because it's not a website. This was a newspaper. Websites didn't exist
Hmm.
when that guy, came out with this information, and that he chronicled the CIA's trafficking of cocaine on behalf of anti-communist Contras in Nicaragua. This got picked up by several other larger newspapers and prompted several official government investigations. The paper got pushed back, which eventually led to them retracting parts of the investigative series. Now, I don't know how the retraction went or what they did, but they basically said, "Oh no, no, that's not what we meant,"
Hmm.
and trying to say that what they mentioned before wasn't accurate. But I'm willing to bet you it was, because Mr. Gary Webb later was suicided.
Yeah,
when
yeah,
people wanted to
suicided.
approach him for more information about those things that were retracted. So, yeah. And that
I,
was in the 90s. That's
yeah,
just
I read a
30
couple more
years
articles
ago.
that were a lot more condemning on the article, the Foundry, because they shunned him. They fired him, they ostracized him, and
Right.
he was found suicided with two bullet holes in his head.
Right. Yeah, twice. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
that happens all. Yeah. That's a tough.
Two bullet holes in the back of the head. Man, that's a
Yeah,
rough
yeah,
suicide.
he was that's a crazy suicide right there. I don't know if he was found, and we're laughing because it's like whistling past the graveyard. It's so absurd that you have to laugh or you'd
Yeah.
be outraged.
Oh yeah.
But but I don't know if they were in the back of his head. But you're telling
No,
me
it wasn't the back of the head.
okay, yeah,
But it was two bullet holes. That was confirmed.
yeah. Can you imagine somebody being one bullet
It
hole, and you think you'd be aware enough to do another?
it has happened, but it's
I'm
very
sure
coincidental for this to happen to this
that
man
yeah,
in
and that
this
was in
incident.
2004. And the funny thing was, in early 70s, Watergate started out as a conspiracy theory, and it
Mhm.
turned out to be absolutely true, made a president resign and sent an FBI agent to prison.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and everybody said, "Oh no, they wouldn't do that. That's a political thing. The FBI wouldn't do that for pure political reasons. They wouldn't go spy on the Democratic National Party's headquarters." That's exactly what they did. The FBI was found to do to political reasons. They do things now that certainly are necessary for national security reasons, but back then, not so much. It was more about political cronyism, and they still do it.
Oh yeah.
They still do political stuff, which, in my opinion, personal opinion, absolutely illegal. They shouldn't be involved. The government, especially agents, civil servants, should be absolutely apolitical. Completely, they
Mhm.
shouldn't be sponsoring, supporting, saying anything about any party whatsoever,
Yeah.
or condemning anyone
Mhm.
whatsoever. Your job is to find out whether or not any laws are broken. That's all you're there to do.
Mhm.
Period.
Yeah, you
But
should have no public opinion about the
no,
matter at all.
no. And me as a former state government employee, we couldn't.
Mhm.
We could at any level, local, state, federal, anything. And I like it that way.
Yeah.
Now
It
it
makes
was
more
done.
sense.
Yeah, yeah. But those they're not supposed to. I know they're not, but they don't really do anything. You saw the FBI director and a couple of agents openly coming out for Hillary Clinton, 8, 10 years ago. And I'm
Right.
like, that should not be done. And doing things under their authority
Mhm.
to continue to support her rather
Mhm.
than, yeah, that's nuts. They should have immediately been fired and probably imprisoned for a little bit. I think there needs to be some criminal sanction to make sure it absolutely doesn't happen.
Yeah, to go into the Clinton matter, they've gotten away with a lot of blatant criminal acts.
Yeah, and the thing is, I said, well, there's been no convictions, of course, because you're so high up that you control everybody who would convict you. Of course, there's going to be no
Well, the most
convictions.
recent was what, her leaking a bunch of confidential information, which would
Right.
be
That's been
huge.
established. That's been established. When I was in the army, I knew people with secret and top secret clearance who didn't properly dispose of material or handle it, and they were criminally convicted.
Hmm.
Now they were enlisted people, but it doesn't matter. In fact, what they had was just a tiny
Yeah,
fraction of what she
probably
had, and much
severely
higher level.
inconsequential. Right.
Right? Yeah, it was inconsequential. But the thing is, they didn't follow the laws, and it was a law,
Hmm.
and she didn't either. But what had happened to her? People defended her. It's like, why are you picking on? They're not picking on her. Not only did
Why
she
are you
do it,
picking on her?
every article, every email, the email server, everything was
Hmm.
done, and that was initially put forth as being a conspiracy theory and a political hot potato by the Republican Party. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a fan of the Republican Party either, but when you have someone who blatantly disregards the law and then tries to create something worse to deflect it away from their actions, and then you have people defend what they did, knowing it was blatantly illegal. It's not like she was doing it in self defense. There is no excuse or real reason for that. And what has happened? Any punishment? Nope. Any penalty? Nope. In fact, you have the very people who were supposed to punish and investigate make up for it. They reason it away and say, it's not a big deal. Where
Well,
if
the
it were
same thing with
anybody
the
else,
accusation on her with the Russian accusation on Trump, and then and it was proven that she was part of the person that was the initial
yeah,
whistleblower.
part of the
She was affiliated.
conspiracy. Right.
Hmm.
And that's great. Yeah, that's what we were talking about. Those are the
Costing
more recent ones.
millions of dollars of tax money
Right.
to do this
And what was done
investigation.
about it?
Nothing.
Nothing. Right. And he
It
won the
blows my
presidency and they
mind.
didn't do anything because they still have a lot of people they know in power
Hmm.
that will just not, they would just fail to follow up and fail to prosecute or pursue it as it should be with anybody else who would have done it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you need to, you know, go to war. What I'm saying is just hold them accountable. That's,
It's at least a white collar crime to cause that much tax money to be used. It's millions of dollars being used on
well, you
that
don't,
alone.
they don't look at it that way, and they'll judges may mention that during sentencing and take that into consideration.
Hmm.
But if it never gets there in the first place, you
Yeah.
know, it's not a
Right.
crime in and of itself uh, to spend money for an investigation. But my point is, there are clear crimes and laws that were broken and never
Hmm.
pursued as being done. And I don't care what party you're in or who you're done. If you either remove the laws or pursue it, especially at the high levels, because those are the people who are really supposed to follow them. They are living large. They are living very well, very luxuriously, commanding a great deal of money and a great deal of personnel who are well armed. So they should be very careful to follow the law, because if they're not going to, who is?
Right. It's the higher authority has higher accountability. That's
That's
usually the
what I
rule.
think
That
so
should be
too. And
anyway.
it shouldn't be an unreasonable amount of accountability, but when it's blatant and continuous and dismissive, yeah, you need to be taken to
If
task.
you have an unreasonable amount of authority, it should be an unreasonable amount of accountability.
Well, you're talking way too much sense, but you know what I mean. It should match, it should fit,
Hmm.
and that's what I think you're trying to say there. And the next thing, that there's no evidence because they've gotten very good at scrubbing any sort of evidence that may occur. Jeffrey Epstein. Can anybody
Oh,
believe that
yeah.
he suicided in
Yeah,
that area under that
yeah.
great deal of security? Cameras all of a sudden off, people
He had
asleep,
a rope in
security
his
guys.
bum, and he was able to finally get what he
Yeah,
was
and
trying to do the
that's,
whole time.
yeah, what, 3 years ago?
Just so happened those cameras went off then. It was really bad
Just for
coincidence.
that time period,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Just so
Yeah, and
happened those guards were asleep.
in a max security setting, and just so happened that they were asleep, which they should never do. Yeah, federal employees, let me tell you, they are well aware, and they were willing to take the penalty. So they must have been paid extremely well or promised something to be taken care
You're
of to do
paranoid.
this. Yeah, I know it, but yeah, and I've like, and no reporter is asked, how many other times has this happened if it's not such a big deal? How many other times has this exact
Oh
scenario
yeah.
happened with prisoners? I haven't
Nobody
heard
even.
anybody mention that. And that's a valid question. I would say that would be the first question you would ask, other than the other obvious questions about how it happened in the first place. But okay, if you're saying this is not such a strange thing, how many other times this has occurred with other prisoners? I'm going to tell you the number's going to be zero in the
Right.
last 10 years, in a decade,
Weird.
zero. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny how that works.
Yeah. So you start having issues with more and more people considering conspiracy theories, and then you have now what I wanted to bring into the talk was the Misinformation Act, which is now being considered a terrorist movement. So if you spread misinformation, and it can be considered or condoned as terrorist thoughts and
Is that a
trying to
U.S. law
just it's starting to come into it and come into
recently
the
passed,
fruition.
or are they still discussing
I I've
creating a law?
gotten. I'm not going to say whether or not because I can't tell for sure, but I do know they're talking about it. So I'll say that
Oh,
at
so
least.
they're discussing it
I'm
as
not
of,
sure if it could be, but I'm not. I can't confirm that right
yeah.
now.
Well,
So.
we need to make sure when that
Mhm.
passes, we
I
cover
just wanted to
that.
bring it up on your. So when you
Right.
start
So I think
having
it's
more and
being
more
discussed to
thoughts,
be voted on and
mhm,
passed by Congress.
yeah. So you're essentially police thought. Thought policing
Well,
people
you
a little
know,
bit
I'd be
more.
curious to see how they do that. If it turns out to be it's false information, terrorist, that how many politicians would be arrested under that particular thing, because they provide misinformation, and not only
Oh, the
that,
media.
yeah, mass media
They just do
misinformation.
leg jerk reactions and editorial reactions of such things that are very that can draw a lot of attention. And
Right. And we could be considered doing it here depending on the language of the law and the degree, but we try to make sure we qualify our statements and let them know.
right.
And if we're saying where we get these things and how you can find them to follow up and confirm what we're saying.
Hmm.
So we're not trying to provide misinformation. We're just discussing topics, but they
Sure.
could be construed that way, that that might be considered what we're doing is offering that, which again, the biggest purveyors of that are mass media and the politicians themselves to make you believe a particular thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's why
See,
I don't see that law going very far
that
with
was
any
what my
realism.
first question is: how much can they really enforce this to any reasonable
Well, they
degree?
can enforce it as much as they want, like they do everything else, or
Sure.
not. Like I said, like the previous people we spoke of, blatantly broke laws number of times for years and nothing happened. So
Yeah.
high level laws, high level people, everybody knew about it, nothing happened. Um, which kind of blows me away if you think about it. The more I think about it, the more it blows me away because I'm like, really? Um, yeah.
So some of the ones I wanted to talk about was, and these aren't confirmed in the most concrete evidence, so I'll just touch on them a little bit, is chemtrails get a bad rap. And there has actually been evidence that they show that they have that multiple large airplane businesses have been hired to dump chemicals into the atmosphere for multiple different reasons.
Right. So that is a thing
One
and it
was a
does
weather
happen.
try to attempt
Now,
weather
whether or not it's
control.
nefarious or bad is another
Right,
story, but it
right.
is happening.
It is
Yeah.
happening, and
Right.
people constantly just completely condemn anybody
Dismiss it.
saying
Oh, that's
chemtrails.
vapor
Yes,
off the wings. You don't know what you're talking about. At that
yes.
altitude with those temperatures and that plane and that wing structure yeah.
Hmm.
But it is creeping out or dripping out that no, it is happening. Now, we're not saying that it's a bad thing.
Right.
Who knows why they're doing it or what reason, but somebody's doing it. They are
Hmm.
creating chemtrails for whatever reason
Right. They are dumping chemicals from planes into the atmosphere. That is happening.
at high altitude, but we don't know
And
why, what the chemicals are, what it's for, but it
yes.
is happening. Yeah, another one that turned out to be true.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's funny. Why deny it? And they don't want people to freak out. I get that, but just tell them something else. I don't get it. Just go, yeah, yeah. What you're seeing is real. Other than just go, nope, didn't happen. Nothing to see here. Move along. Stop looking in the sky. It just
Right.
it makes
Stop
no
looking
sense.
up.
Yeah, it makes no sense to me. You don't know what you're seeing. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I would love to see in the next 20 years, if we're still around, what type of conspiracies come out from the more of the 90s and early 2000s.
Oh,
I don't
I'm
ever.
sure it'll be. I'm sure it'll be quite interesting as the actions of our government become more and more sophisticated. The ones about them recording everything and collating and collecting every bit of information on everybody available at every level is quite alarming as it is.
Hmm.
To be honest with you, what they do with it is something else. But I find the whole thing fascinating. When you take an overview of the whole thing, I can understand why they do it. If I were in that position, I would want to do the same thing. You want to know what's going on. You want to be able to have all the information you need on any particular subject or individual you wish if you want to take action for whatever
Yeah,
reason.
I think the immediate jerk reaction to condemn somebody, or ostracize them or shun them for thinking something that could be initially crazy to conceive, and then having such a visceral reaction to them is never a really good sign. And that's been shown time and time again that it's a very bad reaction. That goes back to the first doctor who considered that bacteria is a thing. He was considered crazy, and they put him into an asylum,
Right.
and he
That's
died 2 weeks
irrational.
later.
Right, right. Probably
Mhm.
from a bacterial infection.
No, they beat him to death.
Oh,
And
oh, oh. They
yeah.
suicided him. Yeah, with
Hmm.
multiple
He
bats.
kept saying, "I'm not crazy. Get me out of here." And he became violent because he's angry because he's know he's not
Yeah,
crazy. And all of
right.
his friends put him into
That's
an
that
asylum.
self-fulfilling thing. You're angry because people are calling you crazy and they kidnap you and lock you up.
Yeah, this was
And
early,
and
early.
and
I
then you
think.
become crazy because you're
Yeah.
so angry you can't control your rationality.
Yeah, it was early 1900s or late 1800s. So they didn't treat those asylum patients very well at
Oh
all.
no, they still don't, but it is a whole lot better than in the
Hmm.
past for sure.
Yeah,
Right.
they did all kind of crazy experiments to them, I'm sure,
Yes.
trying to
Yeah.
figure out the
Because
mind.
nobody would know who are they going to tell,
Yeah.
and who's going to listen.
Hmm.
So yeah, yeah. And I think
Perfect
that
specimen.
yes, yeah. Yeah. If you weren't schizophrenic when you showed up, you will be.
Yeah, after our shock therapy and lobotomizations and everything else we do to you.
Yeah, well, chemical treatments, but again, it was another thing that people didn't think really happened, but did. You know.
Yeah. I mean, we can start going into the conspiracies on the pharmaceutical companies and putting into oxycodone, multiple different other pills that were known to be addictive.
You
Now,
mean other substances in
others,
oxycodone?
no, just oxy itself, and it was pushed and sold as this is a non-addictive painkiller, helps people ease their pain of life, and
Right, and it was
there's no
completely physiologically addictive. I
mhm,
mean, like one of the most
ruined
addictive
lives.
substances that they've ever created yet, and they denied it the whole time. Uh, that's just a pharmaceutical company lying to me. I don't know what
Well, they're
the
conspiring.
conspiracy was. The government known that was it known to the government? Are you telling that they
I'm
knew and
putting on
they
a very
just
loose term that they're conspiring against the people themselves because they
oh
probably knew
oh
better.
oh yeah, that one group of a private concern group of people conspired to lie and pass this thing. Yeah, that happens quite often, especially with corporations. I'm
Well,
I'm I almost expect them corporations to do that. They shouldn't, and they should be held accountable for it and criminalized for it. But they're a private concern,
that I
so
think that's the general conspiracy theory that people
right.
go against is the big companies are out to get you, and people are saying don't be crazy, but sometimes they are out to get you.
They're out to get your money. They don't care
Right.
about you. You're just a casualty. They don't want you to die quick because then they won't get any more of your money,
Sure.
but they definitely will lie to you. I'm just outraged when it's the government lying to their citizenry because they're not supposed to do that and nothing
Mhm.
happens to them. But right, another big one, and this was a conspiracy between private concerns and the government helping them, I think, knowing better was sugar. Tell them
Mm.
how good sugar was for you. You can see ads. You can Google it up and look at ads at how sugar gave you energy,
Mhm.
made you peppier, helps you face the day, puts you in a better mood. And this, of course, is way back. You have to go back to the 50s and 60s to see that. And I said we weren't going to talk about the 60s anymore, but this is so ridiculous. And
I
the
don't think
government at
it's
the
that old. I
time,
think this is early 2000s still they're doing this.
no, they've changed a little bit. This is blatant propaganda
Propaganda.
for
Gotcha.
yeah, for granulated sugar
Mhm.
and how good it is for you and how it makes everything better and why they used to put it on all the cereals for little kids.
They
you
still
know
do.
yeah, they still do, but they would do it and tell you how much better it is for you with the sugar
Mhm.
on it. Now they put it on there and they don't want to put like it used to be called sugar smacks and sugar pops. Now it's called honey smacks and corn pops.
Mhm.
But everything used to have the word sugar on it for little
Mhm.
kids' cereals to tell you, oh, yeah, you want that because that's good for the kid. Blatantly right there in your face. And I was a little kid when that happened in the late 60s, early 70s. Sugar was on the box, it was
Mhm.
right there. And everybody, yeah, get them that. It's good for them. They'll be happy. Like they'll be running around like crazy people, little crazy homunculuses screaming throughout the house. And I don't know what's got into these kids. Could be all the sugar you dump down their throat,
Yeah.
but people didn't
One
know any
molecule
better.
away from cocaine you just put into their system.
Well, yeah, one atomic position away from a cocaine molecule.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's pretty nuts. So it's certainly going to hit something in them to fire them up. Not to mention ruin their teeth if they have a steady diet of it.
Right. Yeah, they still do that to this day. They still try to show, 21 grams per serving size. They don't say the serving size. They in little small letters, serving size, 2 tablespoons. Nobody eats
Right.
2 tablespoons
That
sometimes.
means it's half of it is sugar because
Right.
it's
Yeah, they still have their little ways of marketing to make people think it's not that much sugar into it and all that.
Yeah, well, those are little marketing tricks, and I don't consider that conspiracy theory. For me, the
No.
conspiracy theory with the sugar industry getting in bed with the government, who is supposed to police them and know better and not allow them to do that. That
Oh,
was
that
they were all in bed together in order to for the farmers to grow more sugar, for the companies to sell more sugar, and for everybody to just get this out into the public and to have them consume it so everybody could get richer. That, that really happened. It's known. You can Google it and find it anywhere you look if you just put that in, about how the sugar industry itself went used other people who were supposed to be watchdogs to push their product, which was actually bad for everybody in large quantities. And
they
that's what I'm
still
saying.
do that to
Sugar
this
in and of
day.
itself isn't bad. It's a natural product, even when it's refined. You can add it prudently, and it'll make something better, taste better. If, but when you're trying to get them to consume vast quantities of it, you create diabetics. I mean, this is
Yeah.
known, and you can become psychologically and physiologically addicted to it, or at least created in such a way that it's going to ruin you internally
Well,
and create a health issue
that
for
was
you.
the big conspiracy in the early 2000s, with Michelle Obama, and she had those contracts with big food companies to start providing food for schools and those programs. And they were starting to suppress any type of conducted experiments and showing results of diabetes being heavily affiliated, and fats and saturated fats being heavily affiliated with high sugar content, and sugar being
So it was
essentially
still
really
it was
bad for
still
you.
going on, and it was
Hmm.
associated with her. I didn't even know that. I didn't even
Yep.
know that that type of activity was associated with them. So that's crazy. That's another thing that our listeners will have to Google if they want to find that out.
There's
But
a
you
whole
pulled
document.
that, yeah, you pulled that out from your research, huh? Well, you can go
Yeah,
ahead and
there's a whole
say,
documentation on that Netflix if they want to watch that.
oh, they had a
Hmm.
documentary for Netflix on it, so it's in a show. You
Hmm.
remember the show?
I don't. It's something probably super simple, like sugar foods or something. It's probably
Right,
something
right.
really catchy, but
I'm sure somebody could do a Google search and pull it up, and
mhm.
find it, or at least find a quote from it to verify it. I don't want to just spout nonsense information or made up things. Like, we can discuss it, but I want to make sure our evidence is factual. That
Right.
we say these things. So yeah, that's nuts.
Yep. Lots of
Yeah.
conspiring against the people from the government
Right, right. Yeah,
and
like
big
I said,
business.
just because it's a conspiracy theory doesn't mean it's not true, and that's what we're
Hmm.
saying. And there are more. There are much more, but we just wanted to hit the highlights. And for our next podcast, we're going to talk about red flags when dating. As we
Yep.
mentioned in a previous relationship video, uh, I haven't dated in a while. I'm engaged, and you've been out of the market for a while, but we can surely mention it. And I'm going to ask my fiance what she looked at for red flags when finding a man. And I don't know how I got through them. So I'm very curious to hear. And you can ask your girlfriend what she looks for as red flags. And we can talk about ourselves, what we look for in red flags as women. My age, I'm sure I have different red flags than you do at your age, but they're still red flags. And that when you hit a certain number of them, or even the reddest of flags, I call them black flags. When somebody hits that one, they're out. I don't care what else about them that you like or desire. When that black flag pops up, you're done.
Right.
So
I'm
we'll
I'm sure
talk
there's going
about
to be
that.
some universal red flags for all ages and
Oh, all
genders and
types, I'm
breeds.
sure. Yeah, yeah. So that'll be interesting. So I want to thank
Sure.
everybody for listening and watching. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe to us, and we'll talk to you later.
Peace.